Good morning, lovelies. Today we are going to talk about the White Savior Trope and how it appears in science fiction and fantasy. But before we get started, remember to subscribe to the channel for more videos on fantasy, science fiction, and horror through a feminist lens. This is the last day of my book giveaway, so if you want to win some free books, check out the link in the description. And if you can support this channel on Patreon, we've got a Discord server where we geek out about this stuff. It's great, check it out. Okay, so what is the White Savior Trope? This is when a white character rescues a non-white character, or a group of non-white characters, from unfortunate circumstances. Slavery, poverty, invasion, whatever. Now this isn't bad in and of itself, except these types of stories tend to focus on the white character and their issues and hardships rather than the people of color, which is not only bad storytelling, but it also helps perpetuate the real-world racism and privilege. So who better to talk about this trope? This trope most commonly appears in period pieces or even contemporary fiction, but it does pop up in speculative fiction from time to time. The most notable examples would be Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Jake Sully in Avatar. Although the Na'vi are fictional, they're still meant to imitate real historical societies of color. The whole movie is basically Dances with Wolves in space. TV Tropes calls this the white man's burden story, a direct callback to colonial times when white Europeans told themselves that it was their burden and duty to go out to the Americas, Asia, and African continents to civilize its people, and also take their land resources and enslave all their people. On top of that, the unfortunate circumstances that the white character has to rescue the POCs from is usually caused by white people. Gotta save the slaves from American slavery that was started and perpetuated by whites. Gotta save the black people from Jim Crow laws that was started and perpetuated by whites. Gotta save the people of color from modern day racism, which was started and continues to be perpetuated by whites. If we really want to be the saviors, it seems to me that we should end the actual societal issues of racism and poverty that was started by our European ancestors and that we continue to profit and benefit from today. But that's a video for a more serious and less nerdy channel. Unsurprisingly, this trope is almost exclusively written by white authors, and honestly, I get it. We see the racism problem and we want to find a way to help, and the easiest way that we can think to do that is by filtering the problem through a white lens, our lens, and writing a feel-good story where the problem is fixed by the 2-hour mark by us. See, we're not the bad guys. We can fix this. It'll be easy. We just have to be nice. Oh, if only racism was solved that easily. When we focus so much on the white savior rather than the people that they're saving, we tend to give those white characters narrative arcs and flaws and make them actual 3D characters, which is good, while neglecting the characters of color, which is bad and lazy storytelling. They'll be flat, two-dimensional, and reduced to their worst, most painful experiences. It's basically the damsel in distress trope written in the worst way possible, except featuring people of color rather than just women. Basically, white authors who follow this trope don't write POC characters as actual people, and those POC characters are usually incredibly passive in their own misfortune and rescue. They're not trying to save themselves, they're not digging themselves out, they're not fighting for their own equality, which is extraordinarily inaccurate because people of color and communities of color have been constantly fighting for equality. Most of us know that passive characters tend to be boring characters, and yet we frequently see that all too often among the POCs in the white savior stories. They're all full of POC stereotypes: the magical Negro, the mystical guide, the savages, etc. The biggest problem is that when we put so much focus on the white perspective, we neglect the perspective that matters most in these types of stories, which is that of the marginalized people suffering under the weight of persecution. People of color. We need to focus on people of color. Like white authors, they are also publishing stories that talk about the issues of racism and social injustice, often through a sci-fi and fantasy lens, but they don't get nearly as much attention. Because people think that the only way white audiences are going to be interested in and relate to these types of stories, or any type of story, is if they're told from the point of view of a white protagonist. And yet when I bring up the fact that we need more women and POC protagonists, I'm told that they're just stories, and that it doesn't matter what demographic the protagonist is, everyone can relate to them, no matter how socially privileged. Make up your mind, guys. Alright, if you're still watching this video, you're probably asking yourself, what the hell can we do to combat this? Well, if you're a white author, stop writing the white savior trope. If your story hinges on a group of people of color being rescued, make the rescuer a fellow POC. If HBO had done this in Game of Thrones, we could have had someone like Lupita Nyong'o as Daenerys. Talk about a missed opportunity. You can also invert this trope. The Fire Nation from Avatar: The Last Airbender basically see themselves as the equivalent of white saviors and seek to conquer the world specifically to share their greatness and civilization. They're the bad guys. Their savior complex literally threatens to destroy the world. And while Zuko gets an amazing redemption arc and finally sees that, like many white saviors do, just as much if not more screen time is dedicated to the Fire Nation's victims. If you're a white reader, seek out sci-fi and fantasy stories by authors of color. A lot of them tackle racism and other social injustices and put the focus where it belongs, the people being persecuted. You can start with Dr. Nadia Okorafor, C.L. Polk, and Tomi Adeyemi. Jordan Peele's horror movies if you're a horror nut, Black Panther, A Wrinkle in Time, add more in the comments. And don't do the thing that we book nerds like to do where we say we'll read a book and put it on our reading list and we might actually go out and buy the book, but then we don't ever read it. Put these at the top of your reading list. And finally, if you're a Black author or filmmaker, please put your work out there. You're gonna get a lot of flack from mostly white audiences because we're pretentious crybabies who don't like our comfortable worldviews challenged. But we need those stories. I think everyone needs these stories. As my dad used to say, the universe does not revolve around you. And the longer I live, the more that I see that white audiences really need that message drilled into our skulls, including in speculative fiction. That's all I've got. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more videos on science fiction, fantasy, and horror through a feminist lens. Check out my book giveaway if you want to win some free books. It's the last day you can do that. And if you can, join the community on Patreon. We would love to have you. Bye, lovelies.